My name is Olivia Smith. I'm 28 years old, and this is the story of how I was kicked out of my family's reunion, traveled to Chicago, and made it a movie that went viral. You know that feeling when you're standing outside looking in, watching everyone you love celebrate without you? That moment when you realize your own family chose to exclude you, and suddenly, everything you thought you knew about belonging just shatters? I lived that nightmare, and what I did next changed my entire life. But before I tell you what happened, I need to ask you something personal. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Like your voice didn't matter? If you've been there, hit that subscribe button and drop a like on this video, because this story is for everyone who's ever felt left behind. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for what comes next. It was supposed to be the summer reunion at Lake Michigan, the one my family had been planning for months. My cousins were flying in from Texas, my aunts were preparing their famous dishes, and my uncle was organizing the whole thing at his cottage. I could see the group chat blowing up with excitement, people sharing their travel plans, talking about the activities we'd do together. Everyone was counting down the days. I was too, actually. I had my camera gear ready because I wanted to document everything, to capture those precious family moments. Little did I know, I wasn't even on the guest list anymore. The text message came on a Tuesday afternoon, and I still remember exactly where I was standing when I read it. I was in my small apartment in Boston, editing photos from a wedding shoot, when my phone buzzed. It was from my Aunt Margaret, the family organizer. The message was short, cold, clinical. She said they had decided it would be better if I didn't come this year. No explanation, no real reason, just that simple sentence that felt like a punch to the gut. My hands were shaking as I typed back, asking why, begging for clarity. The response? Radio silence. Nothing. They just erased me like I never existed. I spent that entire night crying, going through every possible scenario in my head. What had I done wrong? Was it because I chose photography over a corporate career? Was it because I didn't fit their perfect family image? Maybe it was because I had always been different, the creative one. The dreamer who never followed the traditional path they expected. The questions spiraled in my mind like a storm I couldn't escape. I felt so small, so unwanted, so completely rejected by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. That pain, that raw emotional wound, became the catalyst for everything that followed. But here's the thing about rock bottom, it's also the foundation you can build on. Somewhere between the tears and the anger, something shifted inside me. I looked at my camera sitting on the desk, and I realized I had a choice. I could let this rejection define me, or I could use it to redefine myself. I could stay in that apartment drowning in self-pity, or I could do something bold, something that scared me, something that would prove to myself that I didn't need their validation to matter. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I was going to Chicago, alone, and I was going to create something beautiful out of all this pain. Today, I'm going to share how one devastating rejection became my greatest act of self-discovery, and how a solo trip turned into a viral film that touched millions of hearts. Photography had always been my escape, my way of seeing beauty in a world that often felt harsh and judgmental. I started taking photos when I was 15, just random shots of trees and buildings, but it grew into something deeper. It became my language, my therapy, my purpose. By the time I turned 25, I had quit my office job and committed to photography full-time, even though my family thought I was making a huge mistake. They wanted stability, a 401k, a predictable future. I wanted passion, creativity, and freedom. And that difference, that fundamental clash of values, had always created tension between us. If you've ever chosen your dreams over other people's expectations, give this video a like and subscribe, because you know how lonely that path can feel. I see you, and I'm telling this story for all of us who dared to be different. The exclusion from the family reunion wasn't just about missing a weekend at the lake, it was about being told I didn't belong. It confirmed every fear I had carried for years. That quiet voice inside that whispered I wasn't good enough, successful enough, traditional enough for my own family. My cousins had become doctors, lawyers, engineers. They had mortgages, marriages, babies. I had a camera, a dream, and a bank account that constantly stressed me out. At family gatherings, I'd always felt their judgment, those subtle comments about when I'd get a real job or settle down, but I never thought they'd actually exclude me. That crossed a line I didn't even know existed. The pain was suffocating. I remember sitting on my apartment floor that night, scrolling through old family photos on my laptop, and feeling this profound sense of loss. There were pictures from childhood reunions, all of us kids running around by the water, laughing without a care in the world. There were photos of Grandma teaching us how to bake her apple pie, of Grandpa telling his famous stories on the porch. Those memories felt sacred to me. They were the foundation of who I thought I was. But now, looking at those images, I felt like a ghost, like I had been edited out of the family narrative. The girl in those photos didn't exist anymore in their eyes. She had disappointed them by choosing art over security, passion over predictability. My best friend Sarah called me that night after I sent her a desperate text at 2 a.m. She listened to me sob through the phone for what felt like hours. Sarah had always understood me in ways my family never did. She was a musician, struggling just like me, chasing a dream that society told us was foolish. When I finally stopped crying enough to breathe, she said something I'll never forget. She said, "Olivia, maybe this isn't rejection. Maybe this is liberation. Maybe they just gave you permission to stop performing for people who will never see your value." Those words hit me like lightning. She was right. I had spent so much energy trying to prove myself to them, trying to earn their approval, trying to belong. What if I just stopped? That conversation planted a seed that grew into something I never expected, a radical act of creative rebellion. I started thinking about Chicago, a city I had always wanted to visit but never had. I thought about the architecture, the lakefront, the energy of a place that reinvents itself constantly. I thought about documenting my journey, not as a family photographer capturing other people's memories, but as an artist capturing my own story. The idea terrified me. I'd be completely alone, vulnerable, exposed. But maybe that was exactly what I needed. Maybe I needed to prove to myself that I could create meaning and belonging on my own terms. So I booked a one-way ticket to Chicago for the same weekend as the family reunion. If they didn't want me at the lake, I'd create my own adventure, and I'd make it unforgettable. The pain of that rejection hit me in waves, like I was drowning and couldn't find the surface. I kept replaying the message from Aunt Margaret over and over in my mind, trying to find some hidden meaning, some explanation that would make it hurt less. But there was nothing. Just those cold words telling me I wasn't welcome anymore. Have you ever had someone you trusted just cut you out of their life without warning? If that pain sounds familiar, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel, because I'm sharing this raw truth for everyone who's ever felt disposable. Your story matters, and so does mine. Let's keep going together. I called my mom that same night, hoping she'd be the voice of reason, hoping she'd tell me it was all a misunderstanding. My hands were shaking as I pressed her contact name. The phone rang 3 times before she picked up, and I could already hear the hesitation in her voice. I asked her directly, "Mom, why am I not invited to the reunion?" There was this long, painful silence. Then she sighed and said, "Olivia, you know how the family feels about your lifestyle choices. It's just easier this way. Easier." That word echoed in my head like a gunshot. My existence was an inconvenience to them. I tried to keep my voice steady, tried not to break down completely on the phone. I asked her what she meant by lifestyle choices, and she started listing things like they were crimes. My photography career that wasn't stable enough, my decision to stay single and focus on my art instead of settling down, the fact that I rented an apartment instead of buying property, the way I dressed too casual, too creative, not professional enough. Every word felt like a knife cutting deeper into my self-worth. These weren't just criticisms about my choices. They were rejections of who I fundamentally was as a person. My own mother was telling me I embarrassed them. The conversation ended badly, with me crying and her defending the family's decision to exclude me. She said maybe next year would be different if I figured things out. If I got a real job, if I dated someone respectable, if I became the version of Olivia they could be proud of. I hung up feeling completely hollow, like someone had reached inside my chest and ripped out everything that made me feel human. I sat on my bathroom floor for hours, just staring at the tiles, feeling the weight of unworthiness crushing down on me. This wasn't just about missing a reunion anymore. This was about being told I needed to fundamentally change who I was to deserve their love. But something strange happened in that darkness. Something I didn't expect. Anger started to replace the sadness. Not the destructive kind of anger, but the kind that lights a fire inside you and says, I'm going to prove you all wrong. They wanted me to feel small. I was going to make myself bigger than their narrow definitions of success. They wanted me to hide. I was going to shine so bright they couldn't ignore me. That night, crying on my bathroom floor, I made a decision that terrified and exhilarated me in equal measure. I wasn't going to beg for their acceptance anymore. I was going to create something so powerful, so authentically me, that it would speak louder than their rejection ever could. And Chicago was just the beginning. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes and a strange clarity that I'd never felt before. I could either let this destroy me, or I could use it as fuel. I chose fire. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and started researching Chicago with an intensity that surprised me. I wasn't just looking for tourist attractions. I was looking for meaning, for places that told stories of reinvention and resilience. If you've ever had to rebuild yourself from scratch after someone broke you down, make sure you're subscribed to this channel and drop a like, because what I'm about to share might just inspire your own comeback story. Sometimes our greatest transformations start with our deepest wounds. I booked a flight for that Friday, 3 days away, the exact same day the family reunion would start. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. While they gathered at the lake to celebrate their version of family, I'd be in a completely different city, creating my own version of belonging. I withdrew some money from my small savings account, money I'd been carefully setting aside for new camera equipment. Instead of investing in gear, I was investing in myself, in this wild idea that was taking shape in my mind. I'd document everything, every emotion, every moment of this solo journey. I'd turn my pain into art. Those 3 days before the trip were some of the longest of my life. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep properly, my mind racing with both excitement and terror. What if this was a mistake? What if I got to Chicago and felt even more alone? What if my family was right and I was just being dramatic, throwing away relationships for pride? My friend Sarah came over Wednesday night and found me packing and crying simultaneously. She sat on my bed and watched me throw clothes randomly into a suitcase. "You're really doing this," she said, not as a question but as an observation. "I'm really doing this," I confirmed, and saying it out loud made it real. Sarah helped me plan the trip properly, showing me neighborhoods I should explore, coffee shops that had good lighting for filming, architectural spots that would make beautiful backdrops. She understood what I was trying to do, even when I could barely articulate it myself. This wasn't just a vacation, it was a statement. I was choosing myself over their approval. I was choosing my own path over their prescribed roadmap. She hugged me before leaving that night and whispered, "You're about to discover something important about yourself. Don't hold back." Her words gave me the courage I desperately needed. Friday morning arrived with a mix of anxiety and adrenaline that made my whole body buzz with energy. I stood in front of my mirror before leaving for the airport, camera bag on my shoulder, and I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. She looked determined, hurt, brave, and completely uncertain all at once. I took a deep breath and said to my reflection, "This is it, Olivia. This is where your real story begins." I grabbed my suitcase, locked my apartment, and headed to the airport. As the plane took off a few hours later and Boston became smaller beneath me, I felt something shift inside my chest. Fear was still there, but so was hope. And for the first time in weeks, hope was winning. What I didn't know then was that the next few days would change not just my perspective, but my entire life trajectory in ways I could never have imagined. The plane touched down at O'Hare Airport on a Friday afternoon, and I felt like I was stepping into a completely different version of myself. Walking through the terminal with my camera bag and a small suitcase, I had no real plan beyond exploring the city and documenting whatever moved me. The energy of Chicago hit me immediately. The sounds, the pace, the diversity of people rushing past me with their own stories and destinations. I felt simultaneously invisible and significant, like I could be anyone I wanted to be in this place where nobody knew my family's expectations or disappointments. If you've ever taken a leap of faith that scared you but felt absolutely necessary, make sure you hit that subscribe button and like this video, because sometimes the scariest decisions lead to the most beautiful discoveries. Trust me, you'll want to hear what happened when I finally let myself be completely free. I took the train from the airport into downtown, pressing my face against the window like a kid seeing the world for the first time. The skyline grew larger and more impressive with each mile. Those iconic buildings I'd only seen in movies suddenly real and towering above me. My heart was racing with anticipation and terror in equal measure. I had booked a small hotel near Millennium Park. Nothing fancy, just a clean room with a view. When I finally walked into the lobby and checked in, the desk clerk asked if I was visiting for business or pleasure. I paused, realizing I didn't have a simple answer. "I'm here to find something," I said, and his confused smile told me that was the most honest response I could give. That first evening, I wandered the streets with no destination in mind, just letting the city guide me wherever it wanted to take me. The architecture was breathtaking, each building telling its own story of ambition and resilience. I found myself on the Chicago Riverwalk as the sun was beginning to set, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something other than pain. I felt wonder. The way the light bounced off the water, the way couples walked hand in hand, the way business people hurried past tourists who were stopping to take pictures. It all felt like poetry in motion. I pulled out my camera and started shooting, not with any specific purpose, just capturing moments that felt beautiful. As darkness fell, the city transformed into something magical, with lights reflecting on the river and creating this urban constellation that took my breath away. I sat on a bench along the water and called Sarah, needing to share this feeling with someone who would understand. "I'm here," I told her, and she could hear the emotion in my voice. "How does it feel?" she asked. I looked around at the glittering city, at the people living their lives around me, at the endless possibilities stretching out in every direction. "It feels like freedom," I whispered. "It feels like I can breathe again." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Good. Now create something that makes you proud to be exactly who you are." I spent the rest of that evening walking until my feet hurt, photographing everything that caught my eye. Street musicians, late-night diners, couples saying goodbye, strangers waiting for trains. Each shot felt like a small act of rebellion against everyone who had told me my passion wasn't valuable enough. I was creating art in a city that celebrated creativity, surrounded by millions of people who were chasing their own dreams. By the time I got back to my hotel room, I had over 200 photos and an idea that was starting to form in my mind. This wasn't just going to be a weekend trip to heal from rejection. This was going to be something bigger, something that would prove to myself and everyone else that my voice mattered. But I had no idea just how big this would become, or how one decision the next morning would change absolutely everything. Saturday morning came with a clarity that felt almost spiritual, like the universe was finally speaking my language. I woke up early, grabbed my camera, and headed to Millennium Park just as the sun was rising. The Bean, Cloud Gate, was practically empty at that hour. Just me and a few other early risers who understood that magic happens when the world is quiet. Standing in front of that reflective surface, seeing my own image distorted and reimagined, something clicked inside my mind. I wasn't just taking photos anymore. I was documenting a transformation. Have you ever had a moment where your purpose became crystal clear? Hit that like button and subscribe to this channel, because I'm about to share how that single morning changed the trajectory of my entire life. Sometimes inspiration doesn't whisper, it shouts, and you better be ready to listen. I started filming myself talking to the camera, something I'd never done before but felt completely natural in that moment. I talked about the rejection, about the pain, about choosing myself over their approval. I talked about how scared I was, but how alive I felt in this city where nobody knew my story. The words poured out of me like they'd been waiting years to be spoken. I filmed the sunrise reflecting off the bean. I filmed my own reflection changing as I moved around the sculpture. I talked about dreams deferred and families who love conditionally, and the courage it takes to bet on yourself when everyone else has folded. It felt vulnerable and terrifying and absolutely right. As the morning progressed and more people arrived, I realized I wasn't just documenting my own healing. I was creating something that could speak to anyone who had ever felt rejected or misunderstood. I started asking strangers if they'd share their own stories of overcoming adversity, of choosing their dreams over other people's expectations. A street musician told me about leaving law school to chase music. A young mother talked about starting her own business after being told she wasn't smart enough. An elderly man shared how he came out to his family at 65 because he finally decided his happiness mattered more than their comfort. Each story added another layer to what was becoming a larger narrative about courage and authenticity. By midday, I had hours of footage and a vision that was bigger than anything I'd ever attempted before. This wasn't going to be just a photo series or a simple travel blog. This was going to be a short film about transformation, about the beauty that emerges when you stop performing for other people and start living for yourself. I found a quiet coffee shop near the park and started sketching out a rough storyline, my hands shaking with excitement. The film would follow my journey from rejection to reinvention, but it would also weave in the stories of the strangers I was meeting, showing how courage is universal, how the need to be seen and valued transcends all boundaries. That afternoon, I called my hotel and extended my stay for the rest of the week. I wasn't ready to go back to Boston yet, wasn't ready to return to the life where I felt small and unwanted. I had work to do here, a story to tell that was bigger than my family's narrow definitions of success. I spent the rest of Saturday filming in different neighborhoods, capturing the raw honesty of people who had chosen authenticity over approval. Each conversation, each shot, each moment of connection reminded me why I had fallen in love with photography in the first place. It wasn't about the technical perfection or the equipment or the career prospects. It was about witnessing and documenting the beautiful complexity of human experience, and I was about to create something that would touch hearts in ways I never could have imagined. The real magic was just beginning. Sunday morning, I woke up with a knot in my stomach because I knew what I had to do next. I had to put myself completely on camera, vulnerable and raw, sharing the deepest parts of my pain. Up until this point, I'd been comfortable behind the lens, capturing other people's stories, hiding behind the technical aspects of photography. But this film required me to be front and center, to look into the camera and admit to the world that I wasn't good enough for my own family. That level of exposure terrified me more than anything I'd ever done. Have you ever had to face your biggest fear to create something meaningful? If you're nodding along, please subscribe to this channel and hit that like button, because what I'm about to share might give you the courage to face your own fears. Sometimes the things that scare us the most are exactly what we need to do to grow, and I was about to grow in ways I never imagined possible. I set up my camera on a tripod in my hotel room, the morning light streaming through the window creating this soft, honest glow. I must have pressed record and stopped at least 20 times before I actually started talking. Each time I'd start, my voice would crack, or I'd start crying, or I'd suddenly feel like this was the stupidest idea ever. Who was I to think anyone would care about my story? Who was I to believe my pain mattered enough to share? But then I'd remember Sarah's words about not holding back, and I'd take another deep breath and try again. Finally, on the 21st attempt, I let the words flow without stopping myself, without editing my emotions, without trying to be perfect. I talked about the text message from Aunt Margaret, about the phone call with my mom, about feeling like a disappointment my entire life. I talked about choosing photography over stability, and how that choice had cost me my family's acceptance. I talked about sitting on my bathroom floor questioning my worth, and about the decision to come to Chicago instead of begging for their approval. The words poured out like a dam had broken, tears streaming down my face, my voice shaking with emotion. When I finally stopped talking, I realized I'd been recording for 45 minutes straight. I sat there staring at the camera, exhausted and liberated in equal measure. I had just exposed my deepest wound to a lens, and somehow that made it feel less heavy. The rest of Sunday was spent filming B-roll footage around the city, shots of empty streets at dawn, people rushing to work, reflections in windows, shadows on sidewalks. I filmed the architectural details that made Chicago unique, the way light played across the river, the contrast between old buildings and new skyscrapers. Each shot was intentional, meant to represent different aspects of transformation and resilience. I filmed a butterfly landing on a flower in Millennium Park, a metaphor so obvious it was almost cliché, but in that moment it felt profound. Everything I captured was building toward a narrative about metamorphosis, about the painful but beautiful process of becoming who you're meant to be. By evening, I had over 10 hours of footage and a vision so clear it felt like someone else had downloaded it directly into my brain. I knew exactly how the film would open, with me talking directly to camera about rejection. Then it would transition into the stories of the strangers I'd interviewed, weaving their narratives of courage with mine. The Chicago footage would serve as visual poetry between the talking segments, representing the journey from darkness to light, from confinement to freedom. I spent that night in my hotel room with my laptop, beginning the editing process. And for the first time in months, I felt completely aligned with my purpose. This wasn't just a film anymore. This was my declaration of independence, my love letter to everyone who had ever felt invisible, my proof that our stories matter even when the people closest to us refuse to see them. And I was just getting started. Monday through Thursday were a blur of coffee, editing software, and creative obsession like I'd never experienced before. I barely slept, barely ate, completely consumed by the need to get this story right. My hotel room became a makeshift production studio with footage scattered across my laptop screen, notes covering every surface, coffee cups piling up on the desk. I'd never worked on a project this personal, this raw, this important. Every cut, every transition, every moment of silence had to serve the emotional journey I was trying to convey. The technical aspects of filmmaking that I'd studied casually became tools of emotional expression, ways to translate pain into something beautiful and meaningful. The hardest part was watching myself on screen, seeing my own vulnerability played back in high definition. There were moments in my recorded confession where I looked so broken, so lost, that I wanted to delete the footage and pretend I'd never been that weak. But I forced myself to keep those moments in, because they were the truth, and truth was what would make this film resonate with people. I spent hours color grading the footage to create a visual journey from cold blues representing rejection to warm golds representing self-acceptance. Every creative choice was intentional, every frame carefully crafted to support the emotional narrative I was building. I rewatched the interviews with the strangers I'd met, finding threads that connected all our stories together. The universal need to be seen, valued, and accepted for who we truly are. The street musician who left law school talked about disappointing his parents but finding joy in his music. The young mother discussed building a business while people told her she'd fail. The elderly man who came out late in life spoke about wasting decades living for others before finally choosing himself. Each story echoed my own in different ways, and weaving them together created this tapestry of human resilience that was bigger than any single person's experience. This wasn't just my story anymore. It was our collective story about choosing authenticity over approval. By Wednesday night, I had a rough cut of the film that ran about 18 minutes long, and when I watched it from beginning to end, I cried like a baby. It was raw and imperfect, and honest in a way that felt almost uncomfortable to watch. But it was also powerful, moving, and real. I sent it to Sarah with a message that just said, "I think I did something important." She called me 20 minutes later, crying, "Olivia, this is going to touch so many people. You have to share this. The world needs to see this." Her validation meant everything, but more importantly, I felt proud of myself in a way I'd never experienced before. I had taken my pain and transformed it into art, into a message of hope for anyone who had ever felt rejected or invisible. Thursday was spent fine-tuning the final details, adjusting audio levels, perfecting color grades, adding subtle music that enhanced emotion without overpowering the voices. I created a title card that simply said, "Chosen, a film about choosing yourself." And I knew that was exactly what this project represented. I had chosen myself over my family's approval, chosen my voice over their silence, chosen my truth over their comfort. As I exported the final version of the film, watching that progress bar slowly fill up, I felt a mixture of pride, terror, and anticipation. This 18-minute film represented everything I'd been too afraid to say for 28 years. Tomorrow, I'd share it with the world, And whatever happened next, I knew I'd already won, because I'd proven to myself that my story mattered. The transformation was complete. Now it was time to see if anyone else would listen. Friday morning arrived, and I sat in my hotel room staring at the upload button on my laptop, my finger hovering over the mouse like it weighed 1,000 pounds. This was it, the moment where I'd stop hiding behind other people's stories and put my own truth out into the world. I had created a YouTube channel the night before, simple and direct, just my name, Olivia Smith. No fancy branding, no perfectly curated aesthetic, just me and my story. The film file was ready to upload, 18 minutes of raw vulnerability that could either change my life or confirm my family's belief that I was wasting my time. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. If you've ever stood at the edge of something terrifying and exhilarating at the same time, make sure you're subscribed to this channel and hit that like button, because what happened next proves that sometimes the scariest steps lead to the most incredible destinations. Your courage matters, and I'm about to show you why taking that leap is worth every ounce of fear. I titled the film, Chosen, When Your Family Rejects You, Choose Yourself, and wrote a simple description about my journey from exclusion to empowerment. My hands were shaking as I typed out the tags, trying to think of words that would help people find this story if they needed it. Family rejection, finding yourself, overcoming betrayal, choosing authenticity, creative healing. Each tag felt like a small beacon I was sending out into the digital universe, hoping it would reach the people who needed to hear that they weren't alone. I didn't expect millions of views or viral fame. I just wanted one person, maybe 10 people, to watch it and feel seen. That would be enough. That would make every vulnerable moment worth it. I clicked upload at exactly 10:47 a.m. on Friday, and then I just sat there watching the progress bar fill up, feeling like I was watching my heart leave my body. The upload took 12 minutes, and during that time, I thought about calling my mom, about sending the link to Aunt Margaret with a message that said, "This is who I am, and I'm done apologizing for it." But I didn't. This wasn't about them anymore. This wasn't revenge or a plea for their attention. This was about liberation, about finally using my voice after 28 years of feeling like it didn't matter. When the video finished processing and went live, I closed my laptop and cried tears that felt different than all the previous ones. These weren't tears of pain or rejection. These were tears of release, of freedom, of finally becoming the person I'd always been too scared to be. I spent that afternoon packing up my hotel room, preparing to return to Boston the next day, feeling fundamentally changed by the week I'd spent in Chicago. This city had given me something I didn't even know I was looking for, not just inspiration or beautiful footage, but permission to exist authentically without apology. I walked through Millennium Park one last time, stood in front of the Bean, and took a selfie with the biggest genuine smile I'd had in months. I posted it on Instagram with a caption that said, "Sometimes you have to leave everything familiar to find out who you really are." Link in bio to my new film. It felt bold and vulnerable and right. I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't shrinking myself to fit into spaces that were never designed for me. That evening I checked my YouTube channel nervously, expecting maybe 20 views from Sarah and a few supportive friends. The video had 63 views and 12 comments. My heart jumped as I started reading them. This made me cry. "Thank you for sharing your story. I was just rejected by my family for being gay, and this gave me hope. Your courage is inspiring. I'm going through something similar." Each comment felt like a small miracle, like proof that vulnerability creates connection in ways that perfection never could. These strangers were seeing me, really seeing me, in ways my family never had. And in that moment, sitting in a Chicago hotel room reading words from people I'd never met, I realized something profound. I had found my voice, and it was louder and more powerful than I ever imagined possible. The real journey was just beginning, and I was finally ready for it. I flew back to Boston on Saturday afternoon, exhausted but transformed, carrying my camera bag and a completely different perspective on my life and my worth. My apartment felt smaller somehow, like I'd outgrown it during that week in Chicago. I unpacked slowly, putting away clothes that smelled like hotel laundry detergent and organizing the notes I'd scribbled throughout the trip. Sarah came over that evening with Thai food and a bottle of wine, demanding to hear every detail of the week. I showed her the final film, and we sat on my couch watching it together on my laptop. She cried harder than I did, grabbing my hand during the most vulnerable parts. "Olivia, this is going to change lives," she said, and I wanted to believe her, but I was trying not to get my hopes up. Sunday morning, I woke up to a notification that made me think my phone was malfunctioning. My video had been viewed over 2,000 times overnight. I rubbed my eyes and checked again, convinced I was misreading the numbers. 2,347 views, 312 comments, 58 shares. My heart started racing as I opened the YouTube app and started reading through the comments. People were sharing their own stories of family rejection, of choosing themselves, of finding courage in unexpected places. Someone had shared the video in a support group for estranged adult children, and it had resonated deeply. Another person posted it on Reddit in a thread about overcoming betrayal. The film was spreading organically, person to person, heart to heart. By Monday afternoon, the video had crossed 10,000 views, and my inbox was flooded with messages from people sharing how the film had impacted them. A woman named Jennifer wrote about being disowned by her religious family for divorcing an abusive husband and how my story gave her strength to keep going. A man named Marcus shared his experience of being rejected for pursuing art, instead of the medical career his immigrant parents had sacrificed for. A college student named Emma talked about feeling invisible in her family because she didn't fit their definition of success. Each message broke my heart and healed it simultaneously. I was reading proof that pain is universal, that the need to be seen and valued transcends all boundaries, and that sharing our stories creates bridges between strangers who become connected through shared experience. Sarah called me Tuesday morning, her voice excited and breathless, telling me to check my video analytics because something major was happening. The video had been shared by a popular mental health advocate on Twitter who had over 500,000 followers. Her post said, "This 18-minute film about family rejection and choosing yourself is the most honest thing I've watched all year. Everyone needs to see this." Within hours, the views started climbing exponentially. 20,000, 40,000. By Wednesday morning, the video had surpassed 100,000 views and was still climbing. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing with notifications, comments, messages, shares. I felt overwhelmed and grateful and terrified all at once. By the end of that first week back in Boston, my film had been viewed over 500,000 times and was being discussed on platforms I didn't even use. TikTok creators were making reaction videos. Podcasters were reaching out for interviews, and a literary agent contacted me about potentially turning the story into a book. The recognition was surreal and beautiful, but what moved me most wasn't the numbers. It was the messages from people who said the film gave them permission to choose themselves, to stop performing for people who would never see their value, to embrace their authentic identity even when it cost them relationships. My family never reached out, never acknowledged the film, never apologized for the exclusion, but I didn't need them to anymore. I had found something more valuable than their approval. I had found a community of people who understood me, and I had discovered that my voice mattered in ways I never could have imagined. The girl who was rejected at that family reunion had become the woman who inspired millions to choose themselves. And that transformation? That was worth every moment of pain. 3 weeks after uploading the film, I woke up to an email that made me read it 3 times to make sure I wasn't dreaming. A major news outlet wanted to feature my story. The subject line read, "Interview request. Your viral film about family rejection," and my hands were trembling as I opened it. They wanted to know if I'd be willing to appear on their morning show to talk about the film and its impact. A morning show, national television, millions of viewers. The scared part of me wanted to delete the email and pretend it never happened. But the brave part, the part that had grown during that week in Chicago, knew this was exactly what I'd been building toward. If you've ever received an opportunity that terrified you but felt destined at the same time, hit that subscribe button and like this video right now, because I'm about to share how saying yes to fear changed everything. Sometimes the universe rewards your courage in ways you never saw coming, and this was my moment to trust that. The video had crossed 3 million views by this point, and my life had become unrecognizable in the best possible way. I was receiving hundreds of messages daily from people sharing their stories, thanking me for giving voice to their pain, telling me that watching the film had given them courage to choose themselves over toxic family dynamics. A therapist reached out saying she was showing the film to clients dealing with family estrangement. A college professor asked permission to use it in her psychology class about identity and belonging. The film had transcended my personal story and become something bigger, a cultural conversation about conditional love, authenticity, and the courage it takes to disappoint people who never truly saw you. I said yes to the morning show interview, and 2 weeks later I found myself sitting in a makeup chair in New York City, about to go on live television. My stomach was doing backflips, and I kept rehearsing what I'd say in my head, terrified I'd freeze or cry or say something stupid in front of millions of people. But when the cameras started rolling and the host asked me about that text message from Aunt Margaret, something shifted. I stopped thinking about performing and started thinking about all the people watching who needed to hear that they weren't alone in their pain. I talked about the rejection, about the decision to go to Chicago, about transforming pain into art. I talked about discovering that your value isn't determined by whether your family sees it. The response to that television appearance was overwhelming in ways I couldn't have predicted. The video jumped from 3 million views to 10 million within 48 hours. My social media accounts exploded with new followers. My inbox became impossible to keep up with. And suddenly I was being contacted by literary agents, podcast hosts, documentary producers, and even a film studio interested in turning the story into a feature-length documentary. The opportunities were incredible, but what moved me most were the personal messages from people who said watching me on that show gave them permission to set boundaries with toxic family members, to pursue their dreams despite criticism, to choose authenticity over approval. I had become a voice for the invisible, the rejected, the misunderstood. But with the viral success came something I hadn't anticipated. My family finally noticed. My phone rang one evening, and it was my cousin Rachel, the one who'd always been kind to me growing up. She was crying, saying she had just watched the film and the interview, and she was ashamed that the family had treated me that way. She apologized for not speaking up, for letting Aunt Margaret make that decision without challenging it. Other cousins started reaching out, some apologetic, some defensive, some curious about my newfound success. But my mom and Aunt Margaret? Radio silence. They never reached out, never acknowledged the film, never apologized. And you know what? I realized I didn't need them to anymore. Their validation had lost its power over me. I had found something more valuable than their approval. I had found myself, my voice, my purpose. And no amount of family dysfunction could take that away from me now. 6 months after uploading that 18-minute film, I was sitting in a cafe in Boston looking at a book contract on my laptop screen. A real publisher wanted me to write my story. The advance was more money than I'd made in the previous 2 years combined, and they wanted to title it, Chosen, a memoir about finding yourself when your family can't see you. I stared at that contract for hours, remembering the girl who'd cried on her bathroom floor feeling worthless, and I couldn't quite believe how far I'd come. The recognition was incredible. Awards for short documentary filmmaking, speaking invitations from universities, a growing online community of over 1 million people who followed my journey. But the real validation didn't come from external success. It came from within, from knowing I had bet on myself and won. The most surreal moment came when I was invited to speak at a conference about creativity and resilience, and after my talk, a woman approached me in tears. She grabbed my hands and said, "5 months ago, I watched your film after my family disowned me for leaving my arranged marriage. I was planning to end my life that night. Your story saved me. You showed me that there's life after rejection, that I could choose myself and survive." I hugged her and cried with her. And in that moment, I understood why I'd gone through all that pain. It wasn't random suffering. It was preparation for purpose. My rejection had become my greatest teacher, showing me that true belonging starts with accepting yourself, not with earning other people's approval. Every painful moment had been building toward this ability to help others through their darkness. My photography career transformed completely after the viral success. I was no longer just taking wedding photos to pay rent. I was being hired to document stories of resilience and transformation. A nonprofit organization hired me to create a photo series about formerly incarcerated people rebuilding their lives. A hospital wanted me to document cancer survivors' journeys. Brands started reaching out for partnerships that aligned with my message about authenticity and courage. But more than the professional opportunities, what changed was my relationship with my art. I stopped creating for approval and started creating for expression, for connection, for healing. Photography became less about technical perfection and more about emotional truth. And ironically, the less I tried to please others, the more my work resonated with people. I eventually moved out of that small Boston apartment and into a beautiful loft with huge windows that filled my space with natural light. A space that felt like me, finally. Sarah helped me move, laughing as we carried boxes up the stairs, reminiscing about that desperate phone call at 2 a.m. when everything changed. "You know what's wild?" she said. "Your family tried to erase you from their story, and instead, you became the main character of a story that millions of people needed to hear." She was right. Their rejection, meant to diminish me, had actually launched me into my purpose. I hung a photo in my new living room, the selfie I'd taken in front of the Bean in Chicago with that genuine smile, and underneath it, I put a simple quote: "They tried to edit me out." I created a new narrative. The reconciliation with my past came not through my family's apology, which never arrived, but through my own acceptance of the journey. I stopped waiting for my mom to call, stopped hoping Aunt Margaret would acknowledge the pain she'd caused, stopped needing them to see my value. I understood that some people are incapable of celebrating you because your success highlights their own limitations, their own fears, their own rigidity. I forgave them not because they deserved it, but because I deserved peace. And in that forgiveness, I found freedom, not the kind where you pretend the hurt never happened, but the kind where you acknowledge the pain and choose not to let it define you anymore. I had been rejected by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, and I had survived. More than survived. I had thrived. I had transformed my deepest wound into my greatest gift. And that was the truest form of victory. A year after that life-changing trip to Chicago, I barely recognized the person I had become, and I mean that in the most beautiful way possible. I was no longer the woman who measured her worth by her family's approval, no longer the photographer who played it safe to avoid criticism, no longer someone who apologized for taking up space in the world. I had built a career on authenticity, helping other people tell their stories of overcoming rejection and choosing themselves. My client list included major brands, nonprofits, and individuals who wanted their truth documented without filters or pretense. If you're on a journey of reinventing yourself after loss or rejection, make sure you subscribe to this channel and hit that like button, because transformation isn't a destination. It's a continuous practice. And I want you to know that becoming who you're meant to be is worth every uncomfortable moment along the way. Your story isn't over. It's just beginning. Professionally, I had stopped chasing traditional success markers and started building something that actually mattered to me. A photography and storytelling business focused on marginalized voices. I created a project called Chosen Voices, where I traveled to different cities documenting people who had been rejected by their families, communities, or society for being their authentic selves. LGBTQ individuals disowned by religious families, immigrants rejected for refusing arranged marriages, artists dismissed for choosing passion over profit, disabled people fighting for visibility and respect. Each story I documented added to a growing movement of people refusing to shrink themselves to fit into spaces that were never designed for them. The project gained funding from foundations, got featured in galleries, and most importantly, created community for people who felt invisible. The transformation wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal, reshaping how I moved through the world and related to myself. I stopped dating people who reminded me of my family's conditional love and started choosing partners who celebrated my ambition and creativity. I cut ties with friends who made subtle digs about my unconventional lifestyle and deepened relationships with people who understood that different doesn't mean less than. I started therapy to unpack the childhood wounds that had made me so desperate for approval in the first place. Each session helped me understand that my family's rejection said everything about their limitations and nothing about my value. I was learning to parent the little girl inside me who had always felt like she wasn't enough. My relationship with my art evolved too. I stopped creating for external validation and started creating for healing, for connection, for truth-telling. Every photo shoot became an opportunity to see people the way they wanted to be seen, to give them the visibility and celebration they deserved. I photographed a transgender teenager who had been kicked out by her parents, capturing her strength and beauty in ways that affirmed her identity. I documented a single mother building a business from her kitchen table, showing her resilience and determination. I photographed elderly people who had left abusive marriages late in life, celebrating their courage to start over. Each project reminded me why I had survived my own rejection, so I could help others survive theirs. My pain had become my purpose, and that felt sacred. The most profound shift was internal. I finally understood that belonging to yourself is more important than belonging to people who require you to be smaller. I stopped checking my family's social media to see what I was missing, stopped hoping they'd reach out to reconcile, stopped carrying the weight of their disappointment. I created new traditions for myself, annual solo trips to places that inspired me, monthly gatherings with my chosen family of artists and dreamers, daily practices of gratitude for the life I'd built from the ashes of rejection. I had become the woman I needed when I was sitting on that bathroom floor crying, strong, authentic, unapologetic, and free. And the best part? I was just getting started. The girl who got kicked out of a family reunion had become the woman who showed millions of people that your family's story about you doesn't have to be your story about yourself. That transformation? That was worth every single tear. Looking back now at that devastating text message from Aunt Margaret, I can honestly say it was the greatest gift anyone ever gave me, even though it didn't feel that way at the time. That rejection forced me to ask questions I'd been avoiding my entire life. Who am I when I'm not performing for others? What do I value when nobody's watching? What does success look like when it's defined by my own terms, not by family expectations or societal standards? Those questions led me to Chicago, to a camera, to vulnerability, and ultimately to a life more authentic and fulfilling than anything I could have built while still seeking their approval. The pain was necessary, the rejection was a redirection, and the woman I became through that fire is someone I'm genuinely proud to be. I learned that family isn't always about blood. It's about who shows up, who celebrates you, who sees your value even when you can't see it yourself. Sarah, my best friend who answered that 2 a.m. phone call, is more family to me than people who share my DNA. The strangers who messaged me about my film, sharing their own stories of rejection and resilience, became my tribe in ways my biological family never was. The clients I photograph, the community I've built online, the people who see my work and feel less alone. That's my real family. I stopped waiting for people who would never understand me to finally see my worth, and I started investing in relationships with people who already did. That shift changed everything. The film that went viral taught me something profound about vulnerability. When you tell the truth about your pain, you give others permission to tell theirs. My willingness to put my rejection on camera, to cry on screen, to admit I wasn't good enough for my own family, created a bridge for millions of people to cross with their own stories. We live in a world that celebrates perfection and hides struggle, but real connection happens in the messy middle, where we admit we're all just figuring it out. Every time someone messages me saying my story gave them courage to leave a toxic situation, or pursue a dream or choose themselves, I'm reminded that our wounds can become our greatest offerings to others. Pain shared is pain divided. Healing shared is healing multiplied. If I could go back and talk to the girl crying on that bathroom floor, I'd tell her that everything she's afraid of losing isn't actually hers to keep. I'd tell her that the family's rejection is actually protection from a life spent shrinking herself to fit their narrow definitions of success. I'd tell her that Chicago is waiting, that vulnerability is strength, that her voice matters more than she knows. I'd tell her that in 1 year, she'll be sitting in a beautiful loft she never thought she could afford, working on projects that fulfill her soul, surrounded by people who love her exactly as she is. I'd tell her that rejection isn't the end of her story. It's the beginning of her freedom. And most importantly, I'd tell her what I now know to be absolutely true. You don't need everyone to see your value. You just need to see it yourself. So here's what I want you to take away from my story. Your worth isn't determined by who rejects you. It's revealed by how you choose yourself after they do. Family rejection, friend betrayal, career setbacks, romantic disappointments, all of it can either destroy you or define you, and the choice is yours. I chose to let it define me as resilient, creative, brave, and authentic. I chose to transform my pain into purpose, my rejection into art, my invisibility into a platform that amplifies others. You can do the same with whatever hard thing you're facing right now. Take the trip. Create the thing. Tell your story. Choose yourself even when it's terrifying. Because on the other side of that fear is a version of you that's more whole, more honest, and more powerful than you ever imagined possible. The world needs your authentic voice, your unique perspective, your courageous story. Don't let anyone's rejection convince you to stay quiet. Your turn to shine is coming. Actually, it's already here. You just have to be brave enough to step into it. So after hearing my entire journey from that devastating text message to becoming a voice for millions, I have to ask you something important. What would you have done in my place? If your family excluded you from a reunion, would you have begged for their approval or chosen yourself like I did? Would you have stayed small to fit their expectations, or would you have grown beyond their limitations? I'm genuinely curious because everyone's path through rejection looks different, and there's no single right way to heal. If my story resonated with you, if it gave you courage or made you feel less alone, please hit that subscribe button and smash that like button right now. Your support means everything to me, and it helps this message reach more people who desperately need to hear that they're not alone in their pain. Let's build this community of brave souls together. I want you to do something for me right now. Drop a comment below telling me about a time when rejection redirected you toward something better. Maybe it was a job you didn't get that led to your dream career. Maybe it was a relationship that ended and made space for true love. Maybe it was a friendship that dissolved and taught you about boundaries. Whatever your story is, share it in the comments, because your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. We heal in community, not in isolation. And every time you share your truth, you give someone else permission to share theirs. So don't hold back. Tell me your story. I'm reading every single comment, and I see you. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. Olivia, do you believe revenge ever truly brings peace? Or does it just feed more anger? That's such a powerful question. And honestly, I don't think what I did was revenge in the traditional sense. I didn't create that film to hurt my family or prove them wrong. I created it to heal myself and help others. True revenge would have kept me tied to their opinion of me, still performing for their attention, even if that performance was anger instead of people-pleasing. Real freedom came when I stopped caring whether they saw my success or not. Peace came when I forgave them not because they apologized, but because I deserved to stop carrying their judgment. So my answer is this: revenge that's about hurting others will always leave you empty, but transformation that's about healing yourself will always set you free. If you loved this story and want to hear what happened when members of my family finally tried to reconcile after the viral success, you need to watch my next video. I'm going to share the uncomfortable conversations, the boundaries I had to set, and the surprising ways that some relationships healed while others stayed broken. I'll reveal what my mom said when she finally watched the film, how Aunt Margaret responded to the millions of views, and the painful but necessary choices I made about who gets access to the new version of me. It's a story about forgiveness without reconciliation, about loving people from a distance, and about protecting your peace even when family pressure tries to guilt you back into old patterns. Click on the video that's popping up on your screen right now, or check the link in the description below. You won't want to miss what happens next. Before you go, I want to leave you with this final thought. Your family's story about you doesn't have to be your story about yourself. They might say you're a disappointment, a failure, too different, not enough, too much, or fundamentally flawed. But those are their limitations speaking, not your truth. You get to write your own narrative, create your own definition of success, build your own version of family with people who actually see and celebrate you. The journey won't be easy, And there will be nights when you question everything. But I promise you that choosing yourself is worth every uncomfortable moment. So turn on those notifications, subscribe if you haven't already, and join this community of people who are brave enough to live authentically even when it costs them everything familiar. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here. And remember, you are chosen, you are worthy, and you are exactly enough just as you are. I'll see you in the next video, and until then, keep choosing yourself, always.